Thanks so much. Mentioning those three plays are, I guess, how I grew up through plays, and it's really interesting. There was a lovely performance of the first 15 minutes of How to Keep an Alien last night, and I sat on the back going, I never would have written it now. But it was an opportunity to reflect on growth and ambition for craft over ambition for production. And I've always tried to keep that at the heart of the journey. I think if you can't have a wonderful time on your own in a room with no one in it, with you in the page, like some writers struggle, the moment of fulfillment is a production. For me, the moment of fulfillment is the process. And those three plays were me asking myself questions, difficult questions, and answering them honestly. The primary question being, how do you do it? And certainly moving from sort of highly confessional, self-performed monologue to dialogue, I sat down and went, I don't want to be up on stage for my whole life talking about stuff that happened to me. I want to be able to write great roles for great actors and take some of the most traditional aspects of structured theatre, as I was referring to earlier, hello, come in plays, which were not in vogue in Ireland, suddenly went out of style, and I wanted to make a case for them. And if I'd never written dialogue, I wanted to have, with furniture, that was my practice run, and I sort of taught myself as I went along. And then I guess what I'm learning is every time you finish, you begin again in the dark. And when the lights come on, when you know what's happening, and then you're finished and you're done, and it goes off again, and then you feel your way through the dark again. So all of the genres have come from going, well, here is my idea, but I'm not interested in the house style. I'm interested in what shape best suits the delivery of this idea to an audience. So that has evolved into three completely different styles of play. And it's not necessarily like, I've done one of them, so I'll do one of them, I'll do one of them. And for Once Upon a Bridge, it's based on a piece of security footage, 27 security footage. I was 2 years looking at it over and over and over when I was just trying to find the language, and eventually it showed up, I guess.
Yeah. There's so much in what you said that I want to come back to, particularly being in the dark and the solitude that you start by shaping for yourself before you even think of production. But before that, Chris, a version really of the same question for you. In the plays of yours that I know, especially Caught and Passage, I start the play thinking it's going to be one kind of play about one kind of subject, and then in both cases you gradually and sometimes quite shockingly make the audience aware that they have been part of your thinking the whole time. It becomes a play in which plays in which at the beginning the theme may be in the foreground, and over time the form and the event of performance takes over in the foreground. So maybe you can talk about that balance or negotiation in your own work.
Early on in my career, I kind of stumbled upon this way of making plays that was a little more non-traditional than what I had personally seen. And that is to have the structure of my plays be a very organic thing that changes as it goes along. And the reason why I kind of gravitated towards this idea was because I wanted the play to almost mimic the kind of transformative journey that I wanted the audience to have as they progress through it. And also that for me writing the play, I always like to challenge myself and kind of explore things that might be a little risky personally to myself, going to some really deep and possibly dark places within myself. And so I would hope that, again, the journey of the play kind of mimics this kind of digging and changing and transformative journey that I myself took in writing it, and also the audience, I hope the audience will experience too. And sometimes that means radically transforming the nature of the play as it goes along. So for example, the play Caught, which you were mentioning, takes the form of, initially it's this lecture of this Chinese dissident, and then you realize in Act 2 that that was all a lie. And then in Act 3, you realize that Scene 2 was actually all a lie. So so I had a lot of fun with that, and that kind of, again, kind of mimicked this urge to just kind of like keep on probing and probing and probing, and the theme of Caught is truth, and so, you know, to mimic the grand thesis that you can never arrive at a definitive truth, you must always keep on probing and probing and probing. So yeah, I like to find structures that mimic the grand theme and the journey.
Yeah, there's a wonderful thing, I'm sure you're sick of having it quoted back at you, but you said once, I think about Caught, I start with a scene and every single scene is going to negate the truth of the one that came before it. And I wonder if that, I mean, it's very overt how it works in that play, but if you're generally interested in that kind of instability or unsettling the audience. I mean, Caught is a play in which ultimately the audience is the one that's caught as much as any figure or character in the play. But how do you sustain uncertainty like that in your other work?
Yeah, so that actually is one of the biggest challenges for me, but I think when kind of thinking about where my personal artistry lies, I've come to the conclusion that my personal artistry lies in what I call the art of rule making. And so I try to make rules for myself, and then, for example, each scene negates the scene, the reality of the scene that came before, and then the art comes from how do you communicate with the audience and draw them in. You might call it manipulation, but again, like how do you find an artistry in that? And so yeah, and a lot of times, you know, it takes the form of really resting in the integrity and the reality of each scene, and drawing the audience in, so the audience really believes in each moment that's happening. There's an integrity to each moment. The actors are performing the truth of each moment before you pull the rug out from under them. So it's not like a series of gimmicks or anything like that. It's more acknowledging almost the reality of life, that we commit to life and moments in life in very real ways, even if those commitments to certain moments of life are within a greater context that are based on lies. And so we will reveal those other depths as the play goes on, but we will live in the integrity and the truth, maybe the emotional truthfulness or the soulful truthfulness of each individual moments. And that's why I think, that's what I tell actors performing. Sometimes they'll say, how do I play this role if in the next scene they're a completely different person? And the answer is always commit to the truthfulness and the integrity of the moment that you're in.
Right. I could also just shout, and I think this is just recording, right? Or is this speaking? No? It is just recording. Sonya, well, actually, this is a question prompted, I think, by both of your work, bodies of work, which is how you stage different kinds of divides or rifts, cultural divides in some case, divides in something intimate, a relationship, class divides. This comes through in actually all three of the plays that I mentioned, different dimensions of that split, very poignantly and powerfully, or maybe especially so in Once Upon a Bridge. Can you talk more about how this is a through line, at least through the works that I've mentioned?
Sure, it's something that sort of starts to grow up through the grain of the drafting process 2, 3, 4, 5, starts to lift itself through these sort of class schisms and injustices. And for anybody, if you don't know Once Upon a Bridge, it's inspired by a piece of footage that was taken from the back end of a London bus in 2017, where a woman was walking across Putney Bridge at 7:45 in the morning, and a jogger was running the other way, and he smacked into her. They shoulder shunted, and he sent her spinning into the road and into the path of an oncoming bus, and the bus missed her by that, and the bus swerved. And it is one of the most heart-stopping pieces of footage. I mean, there's so many of these now. Subways, you see them, and a lot of it is posted on the internet to try and find. And so it was released to the public to try and find the jogger, and it set fire to a taper of just absolute outrage. This was looked like a posh white dude, and there was it sparked a discussion about crime and anonymity, and faces and masks, and how we can appear one way to one person and another way to another. And if you're alone on a bridge and you're angry and you want someone to get it, and nobody sees, what do you do? But ultimately, the only person anybody knows anything about is the bus driver, who went on breakfast television in front of millions of people, and his life was completely filleted and exposed. The jogger was never found. So the play is a fiction in service of a truth where no truth exists, and what developed out of it were 3 separate lanes of privileges. The driver's privilege, Oliver Salbris, of coming from Ghana to London with his family to his dream job, and ending up in this situation where he is responsible. He's the eyes. That's the London bus drivers say, be the eyes they cannot see. And then so I go into the story of all these 3 people, and I sort of expose their blindnesses. Even her blindness, she never thanked the driver. She never went back and thanked him for what he did. And so there are things like that come out of it. And then furniture as well, and in a much more comedic way, I have these 2 women who fall madly in love and move in together after a month, like, you know, a bit of a cliche, but what they fall out is they discover that one is red and the other is blue, and while the other is where they're moving their furniture in. And so it's a queer story that is not interested in unpacking queerness. It's queer people unpacking political schisms. And so in some cases, particularly when I write gay characters or queer characters, it's not about their queerness. That's just incidental. And the negative space where a queer story against an embattled queer story is absent, and that's kind of almost that's the flag wave of it, really. That they're anyway. I'm rambling. Stop me, please.
Not rambling at all. Yeah. Well, maybe you've given me something of a segue to talking about. Oh, cool. How everything you've been talking about, your formal interests, your thematic preoccupations, have had to, or have had the opportunity to modify as you've moved into a different medium, or as you have concurrently worked in film and television. And this maybe allows me to go back to your first comment about being alone in the at your desk or later in the dark, trying to reconstitute what happened. Theater production is obviously very collaborative. I'd be very interested to hear about how your collaborators in productions have affected the writing. But but that balance shifts in film and television, where the writer occupies a very different role in the ecology of the artistic process and the ultimate event. Maybe we can start, Chris, with you about how moving or doing at least as much work in film and television has affected your playwriting, and what you've had to change from playwriting as you move into those media.
I'm still is this on? Hello? I'm still relatively new to screenwriting. It's only been a couple of years versus my 2 decades in playwriting. I'm still negotiating how to balance my artistic life with to be frank, a little more commercial life of the screen. But I have found that and film and TV are also different, very different from each other too. But I have found that in general, I've had to kind of reorient where I find my creativity in both screen fields. And for example, I was just having a conversation with another TV person about this. All of my kind of structural innovations, or what I consider innovations, in theater suddenly don't work for the TV medium because that'll just be too exhausting if you change around the reality of the whole program, show to show, episode to episode, I mean. But I found, I had to really question myself, what do I really love about the TV medium? There is an aspect of, if I may say, comfort food in the sense of staying with characters over a long period of time and really getting to know them, the best TV shows, in almost like a novelistic way. And then that makes me question, so can my contribution be to this? And I realized that, the best TV shows I like are when the characters are unpredictable instead of the structure being unpredictable. So when I write scripts now, I really am careful about putting surprise and unpredictability, to my mind, human unpredictability into characters and character work. And stuff like that. So, to me, it was about kind of really finding where my strengths lie. And, when I first entered into screenwriting, I didn't know if I could do it. But I guess I also found that I had more. There's a lot of craft to playwriting that I might have taken for granted. Just even like character beats and stuff like that kind of comes naturally, and it's not auteurist work, it's more like carpenter work. And so it's kind of refreshing to suddenly not be in charge of the whole vision, but kind of work on the craftsman's side of it that I've been kind of stealthily honing over the years without my even knowing it.
Yeah. Sonya, do you want to talk about your own experience and how it may have changed you as a writer as you've been developing TV and film work?
What I love about the film and TV world is the rigor. I don't know if you find this, Chris, but you send in your thing, your pass of something, your outline of your episode or whatever, and then you get usually on a Friday evening because they want to get it off their desk, and it's like you're scrolling through your phone and it's just pages and pages and pages and pages, and it's a very normal thing. And once you don't become overwhelmed by that, it's a really enjoyable and exciting process. It's just so, I was saying to you earlier, it's a bit like tennis and badminton, theatre, and it kind of looks the same. But it's the discipline of how you hold your hand and how you strategize is also completely different. And a lot of I enjoy a lot of words in my plays, and in film and TV, the camera is the prose, and so you put down one tool in order to honor it in another discipline. And I just love, and I kind of stumbled into it. I got into it from having shows on in Edinburgh and TV producers just trolling around looking for people, and just really leaning into that process and almost treating it like I knew nothing. I thought, how do you do this? It's similar to Chris. What I used to do when I started out was I would go on the BBC Writers' Room website. I would download the pilot of whatever it was and the script, and I would read, watch, try it myself. And I just did that over and over and over until I sort of got the biorhythms of a final draft 1 hour pilot kind of into my head, and that thing of, it feels a way like an instruction manual for the camera crew, but there's no indignity to that either. And I love, if my script is too long, I'll go, okay, I need to cut some, go back over the action, heavy rain over dark cliffs, rain, and that's all. They don't need the camera people aren't going, oh, I see what she's trying to get at. We'll have to wait for this weather. So there is a pragmatic hierarchy that is kind of ironclad within the world that I enjoy, I guess.
That's interesting to think about the importance of the pragmatic or the material, the realities of production. You said just now about not wanting to be overwhelmed when you get, suggestions or notes, and I just wonder how both of you deal with, having to relinquish a certain amount of autonomy or control when you're in a writer's room or when you're collaborating with everybody else on a film project. Chris, maybe you can, theater itself, of course, is collaborative, but I wonder how that's changed for you.
Yeah, you relinquish a lot of control, and I think it was a little more. Not jarring is not the right word. That's too extreme. But when I was doing my first feature film screenplays, because those were like, oh, this is kind of my vision. But then you have the producer's notes, and then when a director's attached, and they will have their own notes, which will completely kind of overturn what you thought was your vision. But it is about kind of, I don't know, just being very humble about these people actually know the medium way better than you. So just kind of like falling into their trusting hands, and then almost, doing an improv, yes, and it's like, okay, I will take we should have a horror beat, a violent beat here. Now, how do I make it interesting? Now, what can my contribution be to here? So it's never about looking back at like, this was what my vision was. It's more like, great, you want that? I will do it, and now I will add to it. And in that way, that attitude is never about like selling out or compromising your principles. It's just kind of like, if you're with the right collaborators, it's very refreshing actually to be on a team, and also, especially if you're, working with a director who might be more of an auteur, to kind of like, I'm supporting you, as opposed to the pressures of being a playwright, where you're the kind of like the auteur that comes with its own kind of pressures as well.
No. Sonya, did you have similar, you said if you don't get overwhelmed when you are collaborating, so what got you to a place of not being overwhelmed?
Getting in the right room with the right people. Kimberly and I were talking about this the other night, about like all the best people I've ever worked with on script, regardless whether it's film or TV, theatre. They see what you're trying to say, and they know you're so close to it, they can just shine a torch and help you through the woods a bit. And there are voices and people with a moral compass and an intellect you respect and want to emulate. And so there's no greater feeling than getting a really big note and returning with an answer and seeing it lift off the page. And so that is the key thing, and you have to trust your gut sometimes, where you can get a note where you think they just prefer something else, and it takes a while to tune your ear to the difference, I think. And then with writers' rooms, like I've worked on shows, and you're there to serve a voice, and if you are into that voice and into whatever little sneaky polemic they're trying to swim under the whole series, you'll help them get over the line, and you're writing down little things that they say in the room themselves, and you feed their own syntax back into the script. And I love serving a voice of a show I'm not in charge of myself. I think it's exciting. And sometimes you're there to go to serve discomfort. Sometimes, like I worked on a show called Breeders with Simon Blackwell and Chris Addison, who created Veep, and it took me 2 days because I was so overwhelmed by the fact that they were in the room. They were absolute heroes of mine. And then one day I went, hang on, no. And I realized that was, they need that. That you know, that little bit of push and pull, and can I stop you there? It's why you're there as well, and not to fear that.
Before I turn it over to all of you, maybe just one last question, since there are a number of younger writers here in the room with us. You've both been working in your field for a couple of decades at least, and maybe I'd be curious to know if you have ever said to yourself, if only I knew this 25 years ago, something that you've learned over your career, a piece of knowledge that is really keeping you going now, that if you had realized that when you were 21 or 22, it would have been easier, or maybe not easier, but more manageable.
Are you ready to go? Go?
If you have something, you go first.
Oh no, you please. I think I started at the top about this. Don't worry about getting there. Worry about getting good. The joy of mastering something slowly over time, like the long game, there's no quick way to learn it, and you have to do the 90% to get the 10%, and the 90% nobody else ever sees, but that's the pathway to the 10%, and that's okay. But outcome is not a production. An outcome is an opportunity to engage at a level that you never imagined you would before. And over the last 4 or 5 years, I've ended up in a room with, and you have to go to the bathroom and sit down and go, oh my God, that's them, they're there. And that is the opportunity, not necessarily seeing your name on the credits.
Yeah. Chris?
I guess the thing that this is more something I want to tell myself now as opposed to my younger self. I think I mentioned this in another talk too, and that is to just really put a premium on being bold. When I think back to the plays of mine that are most successful, they were always the ones that I felt I was being the most bold, and the ones that were maybe not as successful were the ones in which I was just a little more cautious. And so it's always about just really finding what the fire and the energy is, and then just kind of putting kindling on that fire and not really being scared of where that takes you. Because the chances are that if you're being really bold and you're being really honest and taking risks, then other people will find that, and they'll recognize themselves in that in a way that kind of jumps out from other material on the market out there. And also from a very practical perspective, that's the thing that TV people are going to look at. They're going to look. They read thousands of scripts, spec scripts, probably a week, and so the thing that kind of jumps out is always the thing they're going to draw to. So I need to remind myself of that right now to kind of keep on looking back to my bolder choices in my youth, and harness that again.
Thank you. That was great. So we have about 20 minutes, maybe a bit more actually, and I'd welcome your questions now. And I don't know if we hand the mic, or we have a mic over here.
One author who's one of my favorite authors, if not my favorite author, is Kazuo Ishiguro. And I do like, actually, as a playwright, being influenced by other writers from other mediums. I think that almost helps me develop a unique voice. So I'm not just responding to other plays. And what I love about him in particular, and what I've tried to do across my career, is he likes to play with different genres. but he does it on his own terms. And you know, my last play I wrote was a noir murder mystery set in San Francisco, and I was inspired by the way he wrote a fantasy, wrote a science fiction, but it's always a Kazuo Ishiguro novel, and he always explores the same themes in all of his novels, kind of memory and the melancholy of that and perception, and that gave me the allowance too to almost explore my same themes across works, instead of, you know, I want to research this thing, I want to research that thing. I can always know what I'm going to write about, and then I can have the freedom of exploring different artworks as inspiration. So he was a kind of a teacher of mine from afar.
Margaret Atwood, I think, is someone who's just general incredible wisdom is, you know, she's someone I've sort of held on. What would Margaret do comes to mind sometimes. I'm sitting on my own, and she's a master of telling a story slant, you know. I think famously, you know, Little Red Riding Hood, it was dark inside the wolf. Like, you know, she is someone, but also takes real events, and you look at, you know, Handmaid's Tale, everything happened, but not necessarily in that order, and it's pearled into something people are uncomfortable with its credibility. And lots of, I mean, I try to read as varied and as much as possible. I have a toddler now, so books go in my ears. At the moment, it's all Audible, but it is important to read and watch and read masters and take from them what you can. David Rakoff is another wonderful non-fiction writer who sadly passed a number of years ago, and sort of in a way I felt like a more elevated Sedaris. I often wonder what he would have said today if he were here, and I mourn all the writing we don't have because he's not here anymore. But his acumen for human observation and emotional intelligence and humor, and wake-up calls for myself within his writing. I go back to his books, but.
Just quickly, I think it's notable, I mean, as Chris said, that none of your names are playwrights, and I wonder why, but also if there are playwrights that you have found yourself at least in dialogue with or influenced by or writing against even, that have helped shape you.
Yeah, I guess the reason why it wasn't playwrights for me initially in that answer is because I was born and raised in San Francisco. I actually come from a very big theater tradition. I think if I lived in New York, it would be different, or London, if I grew up in New York or London. So theater was never really a big part of my artistic diet as a consumer. But some plays that have really influenced me are Sarah Kane's 448 Psychosis, because which is written in the form of almost like an extended poem without any character names or stage directions or anything, and that really, you know, gave me again like an allowance to challenge myself to think of what a play on the page could even look like. I'm not that experimental as her in terms of how I present my plays, but it just kind of opened up this whole door. And then also, this is going to sound cliche, but Samuel Beckett, because specific in the way he kind of goes specifically to almost like a philosophical literary headspace, that was kind of, again, like opened up new avenues of what the subject matter of a play could be.
Wilde, hugely important as a teenager. First, you know, thought, God, if you could talk like that, you're bulletproof. Like as a 12-year-old going into my teens, and I read all of his. I had a complete works, and I read the essays, and I used to underline. I didn't understand what they meant, and like a master of the balanced sentence and all of that. Sarah Rule. Not only that, but her writing on writing has gotten me through the last 2 years. Going, how do you do this when you have a small child? And I really value her thoughts. And there's a couple of sections of her work I go back to all the time just to go, what did she say? Hugely important to me as well. And I don't know, I've got a good pal in Ireland, and he orders loads of plays and I order loads of plays, and we swap them around, and we so I do, and I like to buy the physical play, and I love it arriving in the post. And when you're stuck or you're like, I don't know, what am I doing? You can pick up something and remind yourself of what is achievable.
Elliot?
You talked a little bit, both of you, about the differences in writing for the stage and the screen, but I'm wondering if either of you has ever had any interest in directing, and like particularly I'm interested in whether you ever thought about directing for the screen. I think I'm thinking about this because Annie Baker, wonderful contemporary playwright, made her first film this year, and I've just been thinking a lot about what happens when someone who has traditionally written for the screen, the stage, is now not just writing for the screen, but directing, and again is able to be the auteur of her own movie.
I have I guess a short answer to that. I would love to direct for the screen, but I don't know if I have the temperament, so it's still something I'm thinking about. Yeah.
I'd certainly like to direct a play, and I've started working on something else, and subconsciously I know I'm writing it in a certain way I know I will end up. I thought if I were to do one, I think this will be it, and I think I've been told it's a niche I need to scratch, and I've been invited to direct a number of times, and I haven't done it yet. But again, we discussed this, Kimberly. We got through so much the other night. It was great. But how, like, directing new work and directing something that is wrought are two very different things. It's like apples and oranges, and it's really important. Like, I have a theory that new directors should be given the Ibsens and things like that, and then you can do what you want. And new plays should be given to people who've been around forever. So, but there's a thing in Ireland where you go, new director, new writer, go. And it can be a bit of a struggle sometimes, because I want to be sent off and come back 2 hours later with something better. And sometimes it can take a lifetime of experience to know how to make a writer do that. So I need to do it in order to stop criticizing other people who do, and and shut my mouth. So yes.
Thank you both so much. I am thinking about the difference between stage and screen, primarily as somebody who has spent her life in the theater, which is in the rehearsal room, even as a playwright, in group play workshops and labs and things like that, and the live presence of other people who are your artistic collaborators in the room. And then if you go on to act in your own works, as Sonya, I know you have done, because I'm not sure if you have.
In college.
But just the fact that on the stage you're in a living, breathing room of people who are co-creating the art with you. And I wonder if you have that experience in any part of the screen world that you inhabit sometimes, and if so, where is it? Do you get it from writing rooms? Do you go to filming? Basically, do you miss that live co-creation? And if not, where do you get it?
I do miss it, but with theatre as well, I've always been, I don't know what it's like here, but when a director casts a play, you're very much involved in the conversation. And in film and TV, it's like you wouldn't even bring up a name in a room. The shutters come down, they're like, no, 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 no. So, but every once in a while, like, I'll have written an actor a speech for an episode of TV, and this happened recently on a thing, and I was really proud of this little chunk of dialogue because I really love giving actors, you know, zingers and stuff. And actor I'd never met before, I've never met her, never probably will. She staple gunned it to the wall, and I was in my living room at home going, yes, that's exactly what, and it was just joy. And I thought, well, there you go, you know, that kind of little dopamine hit does exist. Yeah.
And I've only been in 1 or 2 writing rooms. I think that's probably the closest approximation to just being around other creative people and your peers. And just on a very personal note, it's just so much fun to be in a room of other writers because playwriting is such a solitary activity. And I don't know, you do feel like you belong finally in some ways. And yeah, I mean, in my last writer's room, there was another Yale MFA playwright who was in the room with me, and we just, you know, on our breaks, we'd play ping pong and talk, and she knew what the Wyndham-Campbell Prize was, so she was a very big supporter of mine. And then I would also say, from maybe the film side, yeah, as Sonya, you were saying too, it is kind of like, there are people who kind of come in at an earlier stage and just kind of wrestle with every single thing you're doing at an earlier stage before, you know, like, as opposed to a playwright is where you're a god, you hand down the document, and so it is. I found it actually quite fun to collaborate with really smart producers on even just like powwowing with them, meeting them in person. It is a more collaborative medium. So, and you do feel like everyone's kind of an equal and kind of rowing in the same direction with you, in the same stream. In a play, you do feel the hierarchy in a weird way as a playwright. I'm kind of sitting above in a way, and all the actors and directors are kind of getting into the trenches, trying to figure out your writing. So yeah, in a strange way, there is some like live fun, creative fun to be had in TV film land.
Thank you both. I have a selfishly technical question. I was wondering, in your own experience, how do you balance writing character development alongside plot progression, especially when writing for theatre where time is limited?
It's an old kind of cliche story is character and character is story. You know, if you don't know your characters, you can't tell the story. You can't tell the story if you don't know your characters, and that's where some of the 90% of that no one ever sees bit of writing is, because I'll write pages and pages of extraneous things just about character, just to get that little crack in the door that leads somewhere. But if you write drama and characters, you need to know them as well as you know your own family, and to be able to give real texture, momentum to their story. And you know, drama is real characters in front of an audience making decisions in the moment that affect the future. And like early versions of plays I wrote were very much so people just coming on and reminding each other of the past, you know, and the past simple is not dramatic. It's just, and the better you know them and the more time you spend thinking about them, the more you can drive them into situations that are negotiating what the future is going to be, which is what is exciting for the audience.
For me, I think I was mentioning how I like to play with structure so much. Sometimes for me, it's kind of an outside-in when it comes to character. Sometimes I do like to have a very set idea about, in a very broad sense, where I want the character, the arc of the play to go. Sometimes that dictates plot. Like I was mentioning in the tent earlier, I worked on a play about Mao Zedong's revolution, and it's a play that over the course of it becomes a play about the making of the play itself, a propaganda play about the making of the play itself. And I knew that at least one of the characters was in the play was going to rise up and become kind of a stealth dictator, just like Mao did. So kind of knowing that direction helped me, and then knowing where to kind of have fun and find the characters in a very organic way is helpful too. So within this kind of rigid structure, I know where one of the characters needs to emerge, and then I allow myself some more freedom within this rigid structure to kind of like play around with the characters, have them talk to each other. Often I find what the characters are through the dialogue, through what's going to make the most interesting dialogue, and the characters start to emerge when they're talking, and then this character seems like they're going to be an ally of this character, but that's maybe unknown to me beforehand. But I personally need some kind of a really structured guardrails in order to organically find the characters.
If I can just add something to that, or add a question to that, in a couple of your plays, in both cases, even as you're going deep into character and creating three-dimensional presences for us, it seems you're also controlling the specificity of those characters. In Passage, Chris, your characters have letters for names instead of full first names. Sonya, in Once Upon a Bridge, it's man, bus driver, woman. How does, at what point do you feel you don't want to be that, you don't want to mark the character that carefully?
I think Once Upon a Bridge, it was in service to the real story that they are genuinely anonymous people, so I wanted to the driver is described through the job, man, woman. I chose man and woman because I didn't want to say jogger woman, because that gives him some kind of weird seniority in terms of description, that's his purpose, where she's just a woman. So I went man woman because I don't want I want everything else around them apart from what they did that day to be a mystery. And we all know Bill or Bob or blah, and that just pulls you out of that a bit.
Yeah, that kind of sounds a little similar to how I approached Passage, actually, which is an adaptation of A Passage to India by E.M. Forster. And I removed all nationalities and all signifiers, and it was of wealth and privilege and class divide from it, so that's almost like this equal playing field. And I purposefully set myself the task of trying to make each character sound as kind of contemporary and reasonable as possible, and their power dynamics only kind of emerge as the play goes on when they're in tough situations. And to the point where in the beginning of the play, they all might almost sound like the same character. And my technique for doing that was to simply make them all sound like myself, because I'm so reasonable. And that comes from, just this belief that all characters ultimately do come from yourself. In some way, you are kind of, I think the compelling characters all come from some aspects of yourself. You do need to find empathy in all characters that you're writing about, otherwise they just become cliches. So I kind of really took that to the nth degree with this play. And I think, I'll stop there.
We have a few more minutes.
Question there?
Thanks again, both of you, for finding the time to share your perspective. I am curious about how you approach writing humor, for lack of, I know this question's kind of vague, but do you have any particular approaches or perspectives on this? Is there a process of revision that you use, and to some extent, are you able, once a play's in front of an audience, is it a matter of kind of relinquishing control and not knowing what an audience will find funny or not? I think I just said a lot, but really anything I'd be curious to know. Thank you.
When it comes to the comedy aspect of the work, funny by accident, not funny by design, is what I try and shoot for. So the train is going, that's the story, and as many things that are funny that manage to jump on the train as it goes, that's great, but the train doesn't stop for a joke. So that, because the journey of the audience being swept up in the the tension of the story is as important as the individuated tension and release of the gag. So sometimes in rehearsal, sometimes if a joke happens too soon, I'll take it out because it's ruining the build of a joke that's connected to plot. And that can be a tricky one when the actors fall in love with things and then, you know, an audience shows up and then they tell you what the story is. And there are laughs and recognition that you never knew were there, and there's lines that get the biggest laugh that you thought was going to make everybody sad, and the opposite happens. I mean, I have a line in Furniture, "This is a tragedy I will take to my grave," and it's something connected to me and something my mother said to me a very long time ago, and I wanted to make sense of it and use it in a play, and then the audience just fell around the place laughing, and every day the show report was always like, "Oh, 30-minute laugh on the," and I thought, well, so brilliant. That's where its destiny is. That is where that is the there it is, laid to rest, and rest in peace. Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of maybe in a similar vein, like whenever I have humor in my plays, it's always about the humor of surprising honesty. And so that's kind of like always, never like looking for the joke or planting this joke. It's all about character, like character behavior. Like if a character behaves unexpectedly honest in a certain situation. I'm, as a consumer too, like I'm just a big fan of just very dry humor where characters just played really straight, but say ridiculous things or maybe honest things. And that's kind of where the seeing these funny things living within reality is always the most fun thing for me. But there's a place for bigger, broader things as well.
Thank you both so much. This was so illuminating and wonderful. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.